There's nothing like seeing America, as in seeing America. Chairman Pai, you've done that this year. You've gone around the country in 2017. Tell us some of the things, your takeaways from that trip.
To me, it's really inspiring. Over 4,000 road miles, over 20 states, countless communities and people I had the chance to meet. And to me, this is the real story of America, is how in small towns and in big cities alike, people are coming together to try to create what I call digital opportunity. Stringing fiber, laying cable, creating these networks that will empower communities to engage in digital health and educate their kids and start businesses. I mean, to me, that's the real story of where the FCC's regulations meet the road, and it just inspires me when I come back to Washington to empower companies and consumers to do what they do best, which is use the internet and these advanced technologies to better everyone's lives.
And you really have to see these areas to see the challenges, right?
There's no question. The most recent trip I took was, for example, was to Puerto Rico, and there I actually got to see in Utuado, a west central rural county, how one cable company's infrastructure was completely destroyed. I mean, utility poles snapped by the Hurricane Maria, and everything essentially was on the ground. And to see how difficult it was to install new utility poles, to get the crews to string that fiber, very expensive too, over $22,000 per mile. I mean, you get a sense of how hard it is to recover from something like that. And that's an extreme case, but I think a lot of small cable companies across the United States are finding it challenging. By definition, the business case in some of these communities is very hard to build, but somehow they're doing it. And so I see it as our mission at the FCC to help them through light touch regulation, through our subsidy program known as the Universal Service Fund, to empower them to make these investment decisions. That's the ultimate way for Americans to get digital opportunity.
Well, in Puerto Rico, there's a lot of trees, a lot of shrubs. It's difficult and mountainous, right? So that's something, and you need fiber, right? Wireless just won't cut it in a lot of those places, right?
It's incredible how challenging the terrain is, especially in the mountainous interior, as you pointed out. You go down a couple of inches and you're dealing with pretty hard rock, and so just to install the pole itself took a lot of time and a lot of effort. Some of the cable lines as well, they have to be resilient. I mean, water it can destroy them or degrade them, and so you've got to really guard against the elements. And so in some of these parts, as you pointed out, wireless might not be able to penetrate. You're dealing with a lot of mountains and foliage and the like. So we've got to think really creatively about how to make it easier for those kinds of companies, like the one I visited, to be able to restore their networks.
Well, and it gets to the point of rights of way, and you talked a little bit about the BDAC and the model rules just came out. Why don't you touch on that for a moment?
Absolutely. The Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee is something I've been really excited about. This group of experts, outside experts, is giving us recommendations on some of the regulatory barriers or other barriers that stand in the way of broadband deployment. From our perspective, we want to make sure that those barriers are as low as possible to enable companies to be able to install infrastructure. So whether it's creating a state and model code that jurisdictions can take off the shelf and use to incentivize broadband deployment, or whether it's promoting different ways to gain easier and cheaper access to utility poles, we want to take a look at all of the possible solutions, because at the end of the day, companies are going to deploy broadband if broadband is easier to deploy, and that includes the regulatory part of the equation too.
And that's a model code, so you're not saying this is how it has to be done, right?
Absolutely. You can pick and choose as you like. Obviously, we want to just make a suggestion, and localities and states can make sure they tailor it to their own conditions. So we're just trying to get the ball rolling in terms of broadband deployment practices, and hopefully they find something that they like.
Well, it sounds like there's some complementary legislation going on with some of the dig once or climb once, whatever it's called.
Exactly. This is one of the areas where I think there's really a lot of support across the aisle. I mean, if you're digging up the road anyway, doesn't it make sense to have conduit placed there that anybody can string fiber through? I mean, that's one of the no-brainers, I think, that most people in Washington and I think even around the country have come to appreciate.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate your time, and thank you.
Well, thanks so much for having me, and look forward to coming again next year.